And why is it important for you to keep doing interviews and keeping it out there?
Because I'm her father, I'm the face of her, and I'm her representative in her fight to come home. And nobody's gonna fight this fight more than me, harder than me, and longer than me. So that's why I'm here.
On February 7, 2023, in the Sam Houston National Forest, a lone bag was found. Its contents far darker than what anyone could have imagined. Inside were skeletal remains, later confirmed to belong to the 24-year-old Felicia Marie Johnson, who vanished without a trace almost a year ago. Felicia had come to Houston with big dreams, only to be swallowed by an abyss of tragedy. But how did she end up here, far from the bustling city she once called home? And who was responsible for her untimely death? Felicia's journey to Houston began like so many others, with dreams of a better life and a fresh start. She had big plans, full of hope and ambition. Houston was a city full of opportunities, a place where she believed her goals in the beauty and modeling industry could finally take flight. With her bags packed and heart filled with excitement, Felicia made the journey from San Diego to Texas, ready for new possibilities. But as with many stories that begin with such promise, Felicia's path took an unexpected turn. What should have been an exciting opportunity quickly turned into a string of disappointments. Felicia had arranged a job interview in Houston, one she thought would help her settle into her new life. Yet, upon arriving, she was reportedly turned away. Her hopes of securing stable work dashed almost as soon as she arrived. Desperate to make ends meet in an unfamiliar city, Felicia found herself exploring other options that would take her down a far darker path than she had ever imagined. Soon after her arrival, Felicia's name was linked to disturbing online ads for adult services, raising serious questions about what truly happened during her short time in Houston. Was she lured into a dangerous world she didn't fully understand? Or was this a case of survival? A young woman trying to stay afloat while searching for stability in a city that had already let her down. The reality was far more complicated and far more tragic. The question that haunts everyone who knew Felicia is, what happened next? How did a promising young woman with so much life ahead of her suddenly disappear into the shadows of Houston's nightlife? Was she coerced? Manipulated by someone with sinister intentions? Or did something even more horrifying unfold that night? As we continue to piece together the timeline of Felicia's last known movements, we begin to see a chilling pattern emerge. A pattern that suggests her disappearance was no random act, but part of a larger and more disturbing story. April 15, 2022, started like any other night in Houston's bustling nightlife scene. The city was alive with energy, bars and clubs were packed, and CoverGirl's nightclub was no exception. Felicia Johnson, a 24-year-old woman from California, walked into the club, hoping to find a fresh opportunity. She had only been in Houston for a short while, chasing her dreams of a new beginning in the beauty and modeling industry. She was known for her warm personality and determination, traits that had carried her through many challenges. This night was supposed to be a step forward in her journey, but instead, it would mark the beginning of a nightmare. Felicia entered CoverGirls with the intention of networking and finding work. Maybe she hoped to make a few new connections or meet someone who could help her get on her feet in a new city. But as the hours ticked by, Felicia never returned to the place she was staying. She didn't call her family. She didn't text her friends. Her phone, which was always by her side, suddenly went silent. At first, her family tried to stay calm. Maybe she had lost her phone, or maybe she was busy and couldn't get in touch. But as the hours turned into an entire day with no word from Felicia, worry set in. They knew something was wrong. This wasn't like her. Felicia was responsible and caring, someone who would never go off the grid without telling someone where she was. The tension grew unbearable as more time passed. Her father, Kevin Johnson, couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened. His instincts told him that his daughter was in danger. Desperate for answers, the family decided to take matters into their own hands. They hired a private investigator to help with the search, hoping to uncover any clue that might lead them to Felicia. What they found would haunt them forever. The investigator discovered her cell phone, bloodstained and discarded. In a remote area near Bear Creek Pioneers Park, several miles from the nightclub. The discovery sent shockwaves through Felicia's family. This was no longer a simple case of a young woman gone missing. The phone was a grim clue that hinted at something far worse. For Felicia's family, those days were unbearable. Every phone call brought a rush of hope, followed by crushing disappointment. Every lead, no matter how small, was pursued relentlessly, only to end in frustration. They clung to each other, refusing to give up, even as the darkness around the case deepened. For Felicia's father, Kevin Johnson, waiting wasn't an option. From the moment he learned of his daughter's disappearance, he sprang into action. He flew from California to Houston and began his own search. Kevin was determined to find his daughter. He handed out flyers, talked to locals, and walked the very streets where Felicia was last seen, refusing to let her case be forgotten. Kevin Johnson remained his daughter's biggest advocate, speaking out to the media, begging for anyone with information to come forward. His words were filled with pain, but also unwavering love and determination. "I will never stop searching for my daughter." The discovery of Felicia's phone was just the beginning. The questions surrounding her last night grew louder, demanding answers. What happened after she left CoverGirls? Who did she meet? And why did her journey take such a dark turn? Kevin's pain was raw, but it fueled his resolve. He reached out to the media, pleading for help and keeping Felicia's story alive in the public eye. Social media campaigns were launched, and family members organized search parties in hopes of finding any clue that might lead them to Felicia. Every passing moment without answers was a dagger to the heart, but giving up was never an option. As the investigation unfolded, police began to connect the dots. Their first major clue came when the private investigator, hired by Felicia's family, found her phone discarded near Bear Creek Pioneers Park, a vast, heavily wooded area that spanned hundreds of acres. It wasn't just her phone that was found. There were blood stains on her belongings, evidence that pointed to foul play. Felicia's family was devastated. The grim discovery shifted the investigation from a missing persons case to something much more sinister. Detectives combed through Bear Creek Park, searching for more evidence. The park was an eerie place, filled with winding trails and dense vegetation. It was the perfect spot for someone to hide something, or someone. Search dogs were brought in, and officers meticulously scoured the area, but Felicia was nowhere to be found. The clues were disturbing. Blood traces confirmed that Felicia had been hurt, but there was no sign of her body. Investigators began piecing together a timeline of events leading up to her disappearance. Witnesses confirmed that Felicia had been at CoverGirls nightclub on the night of April 15th. Surveillance footage showed her leaving the club, but what happened next was a mystery. Felicia had reportedly arranged to meet someone after leaving the nightclub, but she never made it to her destination. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered that Felicia's disappearance wasn't a random act. She had been in contact with someone before that night, someone who may have lured her with promises of money or an opportunity. The possibility that she had been targeted from the start began to take shape. Police traced phone records, interviewed people who had seen Felicia that night, and worked tirelessly to uncover the identity of the mysterious individual she was supposed to meet. Slowly, a suspect began to emerge, someone who had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect opportunity. But identifying the suspect wasn't enough. Investigators needed concrete evidence to prove what had happened and bring Felicia's family the answers they so desperately needed. For Kevin Johnson and the rest of Felicia's loved ones, the wait was agonizing. Every unanswered question was a fresh wound, but their determination never wavered. They continued to push for answers, holding on to hope that justice would eventually prevail. This investigation was far from over. Detectives were closing in, but the case had taken a dark and unexpected turn. The deeper they dug, the more they realized that Felicia's story was connected to something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. As investigators began to untangle the events surrounding Felicia Johnson's disappearance, one name emerged from the shadows: Chukwuebuka Nwoobodo. Felicia's phone records revealed that she had been in contact with him on the night of April 15, 2022. Detectives learned that Nwoobodo had arranged an Uber ride to pick her up from CoverGirls nightclub and bring her to his apartment. At first glance, Nwoobodo seemed like just another man Felicia had met while trying to establish herself in Houston. But a deeper look into his background would reveal a troubling pattern of behavior, and investigators soon realized they were dealing with someone far more dangerous than they had imagined. Nwoobodo became the primary focus of the investigation, and detectives wasted no time tracing his steps. Surveillance footage from nearby stores and his apartment complex provided a haunting timeline of his actions. After Felicia arrived at his apartment, Nwoobodo was seen on camera multiple times over the following days, alone. Felicia was never seen leaving his apartment complex. Detectives also obtained purchase records showing that Nwoobodo had gone on a disturbing shopping spree after Felicia's disappearance. He bought items that would later become critical evidence: heavy-duty trash bags, duct tape, cleaning supplies, latex gloves, and a large bottle of industrial-strength bleach. These purchases, combined with the timeline of Felicia's last known whereabouts, painted a chilling picture. The real breakthrough came when investigators executed a search warrant at Nwoobodo's apartment. What they found confirmed their worst fears. Blood stains were discovered in several areas of the apartment. Forensic analysis later confirmed that the blood belonged to Felicia Johnson. But that wasn't all. Detectives found latex gloves, a large kitchen knife, and shovels, all meticulously cleaned but still containing trace evidence. It was clear that an attempt had been made to cover up a violent crime. Even more disturbing were the findings on Nwoobodo's electronic devices. His search history revealed chilling searches made in the days following Felicia's disappearance. How to dispose of a body without being caught. How to destroy DNA evidence. How long does it take for a body to decompose? Each search painted a darker picture and further solidified Nwoobodo's involvement in Felicia's disappearance. He wasn't just someone Felicia had met briefly. He had become the prime suspect in what was now being investigated as a potential homicide. Meanwhile, Felicia's family was left in a state of unimaginable grief and frustration. Her father, Kevin Johnson, became the face of the family's search for justice. He spoke at press conferences, pleading for anyone with information to help bring his daughter home. "We just want to find her," Kevin said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Someone knows something. Please, help us bring Felicia back." Despite the overwhelming evidence, without a body, the investigation remained incomplete. For Felicia's family, every passing day without answers felt like an eternity. The case had taken a dark turn, and though the suspect had been identified, the battle for justice was far from over. The hunt for Chukwuebuka Nwoobodo was officially underway. With a growing mountain of evidence linking him to Felicia Johnson's disappearance, investigators had no doubt that he was responsible. On May 13, 2022, a warrant for his arrest was issued, but there was one major problem. Nwoobodo was nowhere to be found. The police launched a manhunt that stretched across Houston and beyond. Detectives tracked every lead, scoured known addresses, and worked closely with federal authorities. The once calm and elusive suspect had seemingly vanished without a trace. But Nwoobodo's ability to stay one step ahead of law enforcement wasn't just a stroke of luck. It was the result of a calculated effort to cover his tracks and disappear. Investigators soon discovered that Nwoobodo had been meticulously planning his escape. He had withdrawn large amounts of cash from various bank accounts, abandoned his apartment, and stopped using his cell phone altogether. He even ditched his car, a key piece of evidence in the case, in an attempt to erase his digital and physical footprint. At first, it seemed as though he had simply fled Houston. Surveillance footage showed him leaving his apartment complex shortly before the arrest warrant was issued, but from there, the trail went cold. Weeks passed, and the pressure on law enforcement grew. Tips from the public flooded in, some claiming they had spotted him in neighboring cities, while others believed he had fled the state entirely. But each lead seemed to hit a dead end, leaving investigators frustrated and Felicia's family heartbroken. As the search for Nwoobodo intensified, detectives began to piece together a clearer picture of his movements. He hadn't fled far, as many initially believed. Instead, he had taken refuge in a series of locations across the city, hiding in plain sight. Nwoobodo was a master of deception, blending into his surroundings and avoiding any contact that could lead to his capture. One day, investigators received a tip that brought a new glimmer of hope. Someone believed they had seen Nwoobodo at a gas station in a small town outside of Houston. Surveillance footage confirmed it was him, but by the time police arrived, he was already gone. It was a chilling reminder of how close they had come and how easily he had slipped through their fingers once again. The case grew more urgent with each passing day. Police knew that the longer Nwoobodo remained on the run, the harder it would be to catch him. Felicia's family grew increasingly desperate, making public appeals for any information that could lead to his arrest. "We're not giving up," Felicia's father said during a press conference. "We will not stop until we find him and bring Felicia home." Despite the police's best efforts, the investigation hit a wall. For weeks, Nwoobodo's whereabouts remained a mystery. Detectives speculated that he was moving from place to place, using his knowledge of the city to stay hidden. Some believed he had help from others, while others thought he was simply a man with nothing to lose, willing to go to any lengths to avoid justice. Then came the breakthrough investigators had been waiting for. A forensic analysis of Nwoobodo's car, which had been abandoned near his apartment complex, revealed new evidence. More bloodstains belonging to Felicia, along with items that suggested he had tried to dispose of her remains. The evidence was undeniable and painted an even more horrific picture of what had happened to Felicia on that fateful night. Despite this discovery, Nwoobodo remained at large. Police renewed their efforts, distributing his photo to media outlets across the country. His face was now well known, and the public was urged to remain vigilant. But just when it seemed like the walls were closing in on him, Nwoobodo disappeared once again, this time without a single trace. The manhunt that had once seemed so promising stalled, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. Where was he hiding? Was he still in Houston? Or had he fled the country? Each unanswered question only deepened the mystery, and the case began to take on an almost ghostly quality. An elusive suspect, a grieving family, and a trail that had gone cold. For Felicia's family, the waiting was unbearable. Every knock on the door, every phone call brought a surge of hope, only to be followed by crushing disappointment. The case had become a painful waiting game, with no end in sight. Despite the setbacks, law enforcement refused to give up. Felicia's family continued to push for answers, keeping her story alive in the media and demanding justice for their daughter. The community rallied around them, refusing to let the case fade into the background. Though Chukwuebuka Nwoobodo remained at large, investigators knew that time was on their side. The evidence was overwhelming, and sooner or later, the man who had once evaded capture would make a mistake. They were ready for him when that day finally came. February 7, 2023, nearly 10 long months after Felicia Johnson's disappearance, a breakthrough finally emerged. A landscape contractor with the Texas Department of Transportation was performing routine maintenance near Flamingo Lakes and Highway 149 in the dense and remote Sam Houston National Forest. The task was supposed to be unremarkable, just another day of clearing brush and cleaning up the roadside. But then, something unusual caught his eye. A torn black garbage bag lying just beyond the tree line. He paused, walking closer to inspect it. At first glance, it seemed like nothing more than discarded trash. But then he noticed something chilling. Bones protruding from the torn plastic. It was immediately clear that these were human remains. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. Authorities quickly arrived at the scene, cordoning off the area and calling in specialists to examine the remains. Forensic teams worked methodically, collecting every piece of evidence they could find. The remains were fragile, weathered by months of exposure to the elements, but enough was preserved to conduct a thorough analysis. DNA and dental record comparisons would later confirm the heartbreaking truth. The remains belonged to Felicia Johnson. The confirmation of Felicia's identity marked a pivotal moment in the investigation. It was the first concrete evidence of her fate since she disappeared in April 2022. Investigators who had spent months searching for answers were now faced with the grim reality that Felicia had been brutally discarded like trash in a remote forest, far from the life she once knew. With this discovery, the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office, along with the Houston Police Department, intensified their efforts. The investigation reignited with renewed urgency. Teams returned to the forest, determined to uncover every detail about how Felicia ended up in this isolated location. The site was combed for additional clues. Every inch of the area was scrutinized for overlooked evidence. Investigators uncovered personal items that further confirmed the identity of the victim. Though the findings brought more clarity, the circumstances surrounding Felicia's death remained a mystery. What had truly happened to her that night? Was she brought here immediately after her disappearance, or had her body been moved later? These questions haunted investigators and her family alike. For Felicia's family, the discovery was both a relief and a devastating blow. Her father, Kevin Johnson, who had tirelessly fought for answers, expressed a mix of sorrow and gratitude. He spoke with raw emotion, sharing the deep pain of a parent who had lost a child but was determined to honor her memory and seek justice. The reason why her body has been found is so that she can return to get justice for herself, Kevin said. His words carried the weight of 10 months of grief, frustration, and an unwavering hope for closure. The community mourned with the Johnson family. Felicia had been a young woman full of promise and ambition, her life cruelly cut short. What had started as a hopeful search for a missing daughter had become a painful recovery mission, a search for truth and justice in the face of unspeakable tragedy. Investigators knew they still had work to do. This case was far from over. But one thing was certain: Felicia's story would not be forgotten. The discovery of her remains was a powerful reminder that no matter how much time passed, justice could still be found. In the days following the discovery of Felicia's remains, emotions ran high. For her family, it was a bittersweet moment, a painful confirmation of what they had long feared, mixed with a glimmer of relief that she had been found at last. Kevin Johnson, Felicia's father, continued to be a pillar of strength and resilience. He launched a GoFundMe campaign, not just to cover the expenses of giving Felicia a proper burial, but also to keep the fight for justice alive. Kevin's message resonated with thousands. "My daughter deserves justice. She was a kind, beautiful soul with her whole life ahead of her. We won't stop until the person responsible is brought to justice." His words, raw and honest, struck a chord with people across the nation. The story of Felicia Johnson had captured hearts everywhere, and strangers from across the country joined the family's cause, sharing the campaign and raising awareness for the ongoing search for the suspect, Chukwuebuka Nwoobodo. As the weeks passed, the investigation pressed forward, but hope began to wane. Nwoobodo was still at large, and with every day that went by without an arrest, frustration and heartbreak grew. Despite the passage of time, the Houston Police Department and other law enforcement agencies refused to give up. Public pressure mounted, and Felicia's story continued to captivate the nation. News outlets reported new details as they emerged. Candlelight vigils were held in her honor, and her face appeared on flyers, posters, and social media posts across the country. Communities rallied together, determined to keep her memory alive and to demand justice. But despite the overwhelming evidence, the case lingered without closure. Nwoobodo had vanished without a trace, leaving behind more questions than answers. Felicia's family refused to give up. They clung to hope, driven by the belief that justice would eventually prevail. "We won't rest until we see him in handcuffs," Kevin Johnson said in an emotional interview. "Felicia deserves that much, and we'll keep fighting until we get it." His determination became a rallying cry for those following the case. For the Johnson family, hope was more than just a feeling. It was a promise. A promise to Felicia that they would never stop seeking justice. This case is far from over. The search for Chukwuebuka Nwoobodo continues. Authorities urge anyone with information about his whereabouts to come forward. Even the smallest detail could be the key to solving this case and bringing Felicia the justice she deserves. To those watching, you can help. Share her story. Raise awareness. Keep her name alive. Together, we can ensure that Felicia's memory lives on and that those responsible are held accountable. The Johnson family is counting on it. Felicia Johnson's story is a reminder that justice can be delayed, but it must never be denied. Felicia Johnson's case may remain open, but her story continues to live on in the hearts and minds of all who knew and loved her. She was more than a victim of a senseless crime. Felicia was a daughter, a sister, and a friend. A young woman with dreams that were tragically cut short. Her light and her laughter touched those around her. Friends remember her as vibrant and full of life, with a smile that could brighten the darkest day. Felicia had a kind heart and an adventurous spirit, someone who was always there for the people she cared about. Her loss leaves a void that can never truly be filled, but her memory remains a source of strength for those who continue to fight for justice in her name. Our deepest condolences go out to Felicia's family, especially her father, Kevin Johnson, who has shown incredible courage and resilience throughout this heartbreaking journey. Kevin, your strength inspires us all. Your love for Felicia and your determination to see justice served is a testament to the bond you shared with your daughter, a bond that not even the darkest of circumstances can break. Felicia's life will never be forgotten. She will be remembered as the beautiful soul she was, taken too soon but forever cherished. We stand with you, Kevin, and with everyone who refuses to let her story fade into silence. If you or someone you know has information that could help bring Chukwuebuka Nwoobodo to justice, please contact law enforcement immediately. Even the smallest tip could make a difference. And to everyone watching, remember that by sharing Felicia's story, you can help keep her memory alive. You can be a voice for the voiceless. Subscribe to our channel to stay updated on this case and others like it. Together, we can continue to shed light on these stories and ensure that justice is never forgotten. Thank you for watching, and may Felicia's memory inspire us all to seek truth, pursue justice, and never give up hope.